Husband discovers wife's affair through Netflix history. Years-long secret revealed. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. James had always trusted Evelyn, but a simple look at their shared Netflix account unearthed a secret that would unravel their lives. What began as innocent curiosity quickly spiraled into a tale of betrayal, manipulation, and a path towards a truth far more sinister than he ever imagined. James had always been the kind of man who enjoyed the simple pleasures of life: quiet evenings with his wife, a glass of wine, and a good movie. After over 2 decades of marriage, he believed he knew Evelyn inside out. Their relationship had weathered the storms of life, and now, in their mid-40s, they had settled into a comfortable routine. It was on one of those ordinary evenings that James found himself alone on the couch, flipping through Netflix for something to watch. Evelyn had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache. As James scrolled through the options, he decided to check their continue watching list, a habit he'd picked up to see what shows they might finish together. But what he found caught him off guard. Amid the usual mix of their shared favorites, a series he didn't recognize was at the top of the list: Lovers and Liars. It wasn't just the title that gave him pause. It was the sheer number of episodes that had been watched. The timestamps indicated that Evelyn had been watching the show late into the night, long after James had gone to bed. Curiosity piqued. James clicked on the series and began watching. The plot revolved around a woman leading a double life, torn between her stable family and a passionate affair with another man. The storyline felt eerily familiar, almost like it was echoing something real. As the credits rolled on the first episode, James felt a knot form in his stomach. The parallels to his own life were too close for comfort. Evelyn had always been open with him, at least that's what he had thought. But now doubt began to creep in. Why would she be so engrossed in a show like this, watching it secretly? Was it merely entertainment, or was there something more behind her late-night binges? Unable to shake the feeling, James did something he never thought he would do. He logged into Evelyn's email account, something she'd entrusted him with years ago for emergencies. There, buried among the mundane messages, he found an exchange that made his blood run cold. An email from Mark, an old friend of theirs, with a subject line that simply read, "I miss you." James's heart pounded as he read through the brief, yet intimate messages. They were written in a coded language, with references that were clearly understood by the two of them but made no sense to an outsider. But the tone was unmistakable. This was more than just an innocent friendship. The final message in the chain was from Evelyn, sent just a few days ago. "Soon, I promise." James sat back, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. His Evelyn, was having an affair. And not just with anyone, with Mark, a man they had both known for years. The betrayal cut deep, a knife twisting in his gut. But the shock quickly gave way to a surge of anger. He needed to confront her, to make sense of this mess. But as he began to plan his next steps, another thought crossed his mind. What if there was more to this? What if this affair was just the tip of the iceberg? Determined to get to the bottom of it, James decided to play it cool. He would gather more evidence, learn everything he could before confronting Evelyn. If she was hiding something, he would find out. And when he did, he would make sure she paid for it. The days that followed were a blur for James. Every smile, every casual conversation with Evelyn felt like a charade. But he couldn't let on that he knew. Not yet. He needed more information, something concrete that would make her confess. At work, James struggled to concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to the emails, the show, and the thought of Evelyn with Mark. The betrayal consumed him, and yet he forced himself to act normally, to wait for the right moment. That weekend, James told Evelyn he had to work late, but instead, he went to a bar across town. It was a place Mark frequented, a fact James had picked up on during one of their casual conversations months ago. He hoped he could catch Mark off guard, maybe even get him to slip up. Sure enough, as James nursed his drink in a corner booth, he saw Mark walk in, laughing with a couple of friends. He watched as Mark made his way to the bar, ordered a drink, and started chatting up the bartender. James observed him for a while, noting the way Mark seemed so at ease, so unbothered by the affair he was carrying on with another man's wife. After an hour or so, Mark's friends left, and James saw his opportunity. He approached the bar, casually taking the seat next to Mark. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, forcing a smile. Mark turned, surprised but not suspicious. "James, didn't expect to see you here. What brings you to this side of town?" "Oh, just needed a change of scenery," James replied, keeping his tone light. "Thought I'd check out the nightlife." They chatted for a while, mostly about work and mutual friends. But James was careful to steer the conversation toward more personal topics. He asked about Mark's love life, hinting that he'd heard Mark was seeing someone new. Mark laughed it off, saying he was just enjoying life, keeping things casual. But there was a flicker in his eyes, a momentary hesitation that James didn't miss. As the night wore on, James noticed that Mark was getting more comfortable, perhaps a bit too comfortable. After a few more drinks, Mark started to loosen up, his usual guarded demeanor slipping. He began to boast about his conquests, hinting at a woman he was seeing who was way out of his league. James listened intently, his stomach churning with every word. He wanted to lash out, to confront Mark right there, but he knew it wasn't the time. Instead, he played along, pretending to be impressed, even encouraging Mark to share more. By the end of the night, Mark had let slip enough details to confirm James's suspicions. It was Evelyn. There was no doubt in his mind now. But what Mark didn't realize was that his loose lips had also revealed something else. He wasn't just seeing Evelyn. He was manipulating her, using information from her past to keep her in his grasp. James's anger boiled beneath the surface, but he kept his composure. He needed to think, to plan his next move carefully. This wasn't just about confronting Evelyn anymore. This was about exposing Mark for the snake he was and making sure he could never hurt them again. As James left the bar that night, his mind raced with possibilities. He knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Over the next few days, James's mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. The knowledge that Mark had been manipulating Evelyn fueled his anger, turning it into a cold, calculated determination. He would expose Mark, but he needed to be smart about it. A direct confrontation could backfire, especially if Mark decided to twist the situation in his favor. James began to research Mark's background, digging into anything that could be used against him. Late at night, while Evelyn was asleep, he scoured the internet, piecing together bits of information. Mark had always been a smooth talker, someone who knew how to charm his way into people's lives, but James was determined to find his weaknesses. He found out that Mark had a history of failed relationships, most of which ended on bad terms. There were whispers of him using people for money, manipulating them emotionally, and leaving them when they were no longer useful to him. James reached out to a few of Mark's ex-partners, posing as a concerned friend. What he learned from them only confirmed his worst fears. Mark was a predator, someone who thrived on control and manipulation. But James needed more than just rumors and hearsay. He needed concrete evidence, something that would not only expose Mark but also prove to Evelyn that she had been deceived. He decided to dig deeper into Mark's financials, hoping to find a trail of deceit. Through a friend who worked in finance, James managed to get access to some of Mark's bank records. It didn't take long to uncover the shady dealings. Mark had been funneling money from several different sources, including some that seemed to have connections to less than legal activities. There were large withdrawals from accounts that didn't match Mark's lifestyle, suggesting that he was either in debt or paying someone off. James's heart pounded as he pieced it all together. This was exactly what he needed. A way to prove to Evelyn that Mark wasn't who he appeared to be, and a way to destroy Mark's life in the process. But how to use this information was still a question he needed to answer. One night, as he sat in his car outside Mark's apartment, James's phone buzzed. It was a text from Evelyn. "Miss you. Can't wait to see you." The message wasn't meant for him, but for Mark. His hands trembled as he read the words, the final confirmation that Evelyn was still deeply entangled in Mark's web. James knew what he had to do. He would confront Evelyn, but not before he had everything in place. He needed to record her confession, to have proof of her affair and of Mark's manipulation. That way, if things went south, he would have leverage. He spent the next day setting up hidden cameras in their house, carefully placing them in spots where Evelyn wouldn't notice. It felt wrong, invasive even, but James justified it to himself as necessary. This was the only way to protect himself, to ensure that the truth came out. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, James could hardly keep his composure. Evelyn seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere, but she made an effort to engage in small talk. James played along, his heart pounding with the knowledge of what was to come. He knew that in just a few hours, everything would change. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, James could feel the tension building inside him. He had to time everything perfectly. Once Evelyn was asleep, he would trigger the cameras and set his plan in motion. But the waiting, the anticipation, was almost unbearable. Finally, as the house settled into silence, James moved into action. He quietly slipped out of bed and went to the living room, where he had stashed a digital recorder. Taking a deep breath, he walked back to the bedroom and gently shook Evelyn awake. "Evelyn," he whispered, "we need to talk." Evelyn stirred, blinking up at him in confusion. "James? What's wrong?" "It's the middle of the night. There's something I need to ask you," James said, his voice calm, though inside he was anything but. "It's about Mark." The mention of Mark's name seemed to jolt Evelyn awake. She sat up, her eyes wide. "Mark? What about him?" James could see the fear in her eyes, the way she immediately went on the defensive. It only confirmed what he already knew. "I found the emails," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I know what's been going on." Evelyn's face paled, and she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "James, I can explain." "Explain what?" James cut her off, his anger finally bubbling to the surface. "That you've been lying to me? Cheating on me with someone who's been using you?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "It's not like that, James. You don't understand." "Then help me understand," James demanded, "because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been betraying me for months, maybe even years. And all for what? For Mark." Evelyn was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake, James. I was lonely, and Mark, he was there. He made me feel wanted." James's heart twisted at her words, but he forced himself to stay focused. "And what about now? Are you still seeing him?" Evelyn hesitated, and that was all the confirmation James needed. He reached for the digital recorder, pressing the button to start recording. "I need you to be honest with me, Evelyn. Are you still seeing him?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with guilt and pain. "Yes," she admitted softly, "but it's complicated. He knows things about me, things from my past. He's been using them against me." James felt a cold chill run down his spine. "What kind of things?" "Things I've never told you," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "Things I'm ashamed of. He's been blackmailing me, James. That's why I couldn't stop. I wanted to, but he wouldn't let me." James's mind raced as he processed her words. This was worse than he had imagined. Mark wasn't just having an affair with Evelyn. He was controlling her, manipulating her through fear and shame. But even as the anger surged within him, James knew he couldn't let it show. Not yet. He needed more. He needed Evelyn to keep talking, to reveal everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" James asked, his voice softer now, tinged with the hurt he felt deep inside. "Why didn't you trust me?" "I was scared," Evelyn confessed, sobbing now. "I thought you'd hate me, that you'd leave me. And Mark, he made me believe that I had no other choice." James clenched his fists, struggling to maintain his composure. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about control, power, and the depths to which Mark had sunk to get what he wanted. He had what he needed. The confession was recorded. The evidence was in his hands. But as he looked at Evelyn, broken and vulnerable, he realized that the hardest part was yet to come. He had to decide what to do with this information, how to confront Mark, and whether there was any way to salvage his marriage. As James turned off the recorder and sat down beside Evelyn, he knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. But one thing was certain: Mark would pay for what he had done. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension between James and Evelyn. She was distant, haunted by the weight of her confession, while James maintained a facade of calm. Inside, however, he was meticulously planning his next move. He knew he couldn't confront Mark directly, not yet. First, he needed to ensure that Mark would have no escape, no way to wriggle out of the mess he had created. James decided to use the information he had gathered against Mark strategically. He spent hours crafting a detailed plan, one that would not only expose Mark's manipulation of Evelyn, but also reveal his financial misdeeds. James knew that if he could bring Mark down legally, it would destroy his influence over Evelyn and give them a chance to rebuild their lives. He began by contacting one of Mark's former partners, a woman named Lisa who had been left in financial ruin after her relationship with him. Lisa was more than willing to help James, eager to see Mark face justice for what he had done to her. Together, they compiled evidence of Mark's fraudulent activities, including bank statements and emails that showed how he had siphoned money from unsuspecting victims. James then reached out to a lawyer he trusted, explaining the situation in careful detail. The lawyer, understanding the sensitivity of the matter, agreed to take on the case. They would move forward cautiously, ensuring that everything was airtight before they confronted Mark. But James knew that legal action alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to break Mark's hold over Evelyn, to free her from the fear and shame that had kept her trapped in his web. For that, he needed to lure Mark into a situation where he would reveal his true nature. James decided to set a trap. He would arrange a meeting between Mark and Evelyn, under the pretense that Evelyn wanted to discuss their relationship. James would secretly record the entire conversation, hoping to capture Mark's threats and manipulations on tape. With that evidence, he could prove to Evelyn that Mark was nothing more than a conman, and to the authorities that he was a criminal. The day of the meeting, James told Evelyn he was going out of town for work, but instead, he positioned himself nearby, ready to listen in on their conversation. Evelyn, still racked with guilt and fear, agreed to meet Mark at a quiet cafe where they had often met in the past. As James sat in his car, listening to the audio feed from the recorder he had hidden in Evelyn's purse, his heart pounded with anticipation. He heard Evelyn greet Mark, her voice trembling slightly. Mark, ever the charmer, was smooth and confident, completely unaware of the trap he was walking into. "Evelyn, you look beautiful as always," Mark said, his voice oozing with false sincerity. "I'm glad you wanted to see me. I've missed you." "Mark, we need to talk," Evelyn replied, her tone more serious. Whatever we have, it needs to end." Mark's laughter sent a chill down James's spine. "End? Come on, Evelyn, we both know you don't mean that. You need me, and besides, do you really think you can just walk away?" "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, her voice wavering. "You know exactly what I mean," Mark said, his tone suddenly darker. "You think I've forgotten about what you did? The things you told me? I've got everything, Evelyn. One word from me, and your perfect little life is over." James clenched his fists as he listened to Mark's threats. This was exactly what he needed, proof that Mark was using blackmail to keep Evelyn under his control. But he also knew that this conversation was far from over. He needed Mark to keep talking, to dig his own grave deeper. "I never wanted any of this," Evelyn said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You've twisted everything. You made me feel like I had no choice." Mark's laugh was cold and unfeeling. "That's because you don't. You're in too deep, Evelyn. But don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. As long as you do what I say, everything will be fine." James had heard enough. He knew that with this recording, he could not only free Evelyn from Mark's grasp, but also bring Mark to justice. But he also knew that the next step would be the hardest, confronting Mark face to face and ensuring that he never hurt anyone again. The next evening, James arranged to meet Mark under the guise of a friendly get-together. He chose a neutral location, a secluded park where they wouldn't be disturbed. Mark, completely unaware of what was coming, agreed without hesitation. He saw James as nothing more than a gullible husband, someone he could easily manipulate or dismiss. As James waited at the park, his mind raced through everything that had led to this moment. He had the recording, the evidence of Mark's financial crimes, and most importantly, the will to see this through to the end. But as confident as he was in his plan, a part of him couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just about justice. This was about ending a chapter of his life that had brought him nothing but pain. When Mark arrived, he greeted James with a broad smile, completely oblivious to the tension in the air. "James, good to see you. What's this all about?" James forced a smile, though his eyes remained cold. "I thought we should talk, man to man." "Sure thing," Mark said, his tone casual. "What's on your mind?" James took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "It's about Evelyn." Mark's expression barely changed, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Perhaps recognition that this wasn't going to be just another friendly chat. "Evelyn? What about her?" "I know everything, Mark," James said, his voice steady but laced with the anger he had been holding back. "The affair, the blackmail, all of it. I've got recordings, bank records. Enough to bury you." For a moment, Mark seemed to freeze, his eyes narrowing as he realized the gravity of the situation. But then, as if switching to autopilot, he tried to laugh it off. "Come on, James. Don't be ridiculous. You're not going to." "I'm not bluffing," James interrupted, his voice cold as ice. "You've been using my wife, manipulating her, and now you're going to pay for it." Mark's smile faded, replaced by a mask of anger. "You don't know what you're getting into, James. You think you can just walk away from this? You think Evelyn is some innocent victim? She's just as much to blame as I am." James clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "Maybe she is, but she's my wife and you've crossed a line. I'm giving you one chance, Mark. Leave her alone. Leave us alone or I swear, I'll make sure you rot in prison." For a moment, there was silence between them, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Mark's expression shifted, the anger giving way to something more calculating. "You're serious, aren't you? You really think you can win this?" James didn't hesitate. "I know I can." Mark stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing his options. But James could see the fear creeping into his eyes, the realization that he had underestimated his opponent. Finally, Mark exhaled sharply and took a step back. "Fine, you win, James. But don't think this is over. You might have the upper hand now, but people like me, we always find a way back." James didn't flinch. "Not this time." With that, Mark turned and walked away, his shoulders tense with barely concealed rage. James watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering unease. He knew that Mark was dangerous, and that he would likely try to find some way to retaliate. But for now, the immediate threat was gone. He had done what he needed to do, protected Evelyn and secured the evidence that would ensure Mark's downfall. As James walked back to his car, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. But deep down, he knew that this wasn't the end. There were still loose ends to tie up and a marriage to mend, if that was even possible. But whatever came next, James knew that he had the strength to face it. He had been pushed to his limits and had emerged stronger, more determined than ever to protect what mattered most. The days following the confrontation with Mark were a whirlwind for James and Evelyn. The sense of relief James felt after driving Mark away was quickly replaced by the daunting reality of what lay ahead. The damage had been done, and now they had to face the consequences together, if they even could. Evelyn was a shadow of her former self, guilt and shame weighing heavily on her. She had confessed everything to James, the details of her affair, the secrets Mark had held over her, and the fear that had kept her silent for so long. But as much as she tried to explain, James couldn't shake the betrayal he felt. The woman he had trusted more than anyone had hidden a part of her life from him, and it was a wound that would take time to heal. James, for his part, was caught in a storm of emotions. His anger toward Mark had driven him to take action, but now that the immediate threat was gone, He was left to grapple with the pain of his wife's infidelity. He wanted to forgive her, to rebuild what they had lost. But the hurt was too fresh, too raw. Every time he looked at Evelyn, he was reminded of the lies, the deceit, and the man who had nearly destroyed their marriage. But despite the tension between them, James knew that they needed to stick together if they were to move forward. They had already started the legal process against Mark, working with the lawyer to ensure that he would be held accountable for his crimes. The recordings, the financial evidence, they had everything they needed to make sure Mark wouldn't escape justice. But that was only one part of the battle. The other part was much more personal. James and Evelyn had to confront the state of their marriage, to decide if they could ever truly trust each other again. They began to see a marriage counselor, someone who could help them navigate the complicated emotions that had surfaced. The sessions were difficult, forcing them to confront painful truths and buried resentments. Evelyn admitted that she had felt neglected in their marriage, that Mark had offered her the attention and validation she craved. But she also acknowledged that she had made a terrible mistake, one that she would regret for the rest of her life. She pleaded with James for forgiveness, promising that she would do whatever it took to make things right. James, in turn, confessed his own failings, the times he had taken Evelyn for granted, the emotional distance that had grown between them over the years. But he also made it clear that while he was willing to try to repair their relationship, it wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, is not easily restored. Their journey toward healing was fraught with ups and downs. Some days they would make progress, reconnecting in ways that reminded them of why they had fallen in love in the first place. But other days, the past would rear its ugly head, and they would find themselves arguing, hurtful words cutting deep. Yet through it all, there was a shared determination to make it work. They had been through too much to give up now. The experience had changed them both, forcing them to re-examine their priorities, their relationship, and what truly mattered. And so, they pressed on, one step at a time, knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but hopeful that, in the end, it would lead to a place of healing and renewal. Months passed, and slowly, the dust began to settle. Mark had been arrested and was facing charges that would likely lead to a lengthy prison sentence. The weight of his manipulation and deceit was finally being exposed, not just to Evelyn and James, but to everyone he had wronged. Justice, it seemed, was being served. But for James and Evelyn, the real victory was more personal. They had survived the storm that had threatened to tear them apart, and now they were beginning to see the light on the other side. The counseling sessions continued, helping them rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It was a slow process, and there were still moments of doubt and pain, but they were committed to the journey. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset, James took Evelyn's hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about how far they had come. "We've been through hell," James said softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "But I think we're going to make it." Evelyn squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know we will," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything, James. I wish I could take it all back." James turned to her, his expression gentle but firm. "We can't change the past, Evelyn, but we can learn from it. We can be better together." Evelyn nodded, a small smile breaking through the sadness. "I want that, more than anything." For the first time in a long while, James felt a sense of peace. The anger and betrayal that had consumed him were still there, but they were no longer the driving force in his life. Instead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to rebuilding the life they had almost lost. They talked long into the night, sharing their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. There was no magic solution, no quick fix to the problems they faced, but there was a willingness to try, to fight for the life they both wanted. As the night deepened, they made a promise to each other. They would take it one day at a time, forgiving each other for their mistakes, and moving forward with the knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. James knew that their story wasn't over. It was just entering a new chapter. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and struggle, but he was no longer afraid. He had faced the worst, and he had come out the other side with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. As they sat together, hand in hand, watching the stars twinkle above, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.